Lord Rykard, the head of the Volcano Manor, a ruthless justiciar of the Golden Order and a shard-bearing demigod.
So, tarnished. Have you ever harbored doubts about the burden of grace and the dogmatic ramblings of the Fingers? If you have, why not join the Volcano Manor and fight with us, rise with us, against the Erdtree?
Once a man who was adored and loved by thousands, he befell a most twisted fate, a fate that would label him as one of the greatest enemies of the Erdtree.
Rykard has committed the grave sin of blasphemy. Marking himself as an enemy never to be forgiven.
For Rykard, he was a man that glimmered with all the traits of a great leader. However, deep down, beneath his perfect mask, a darkness was beginning to form. His morals, motivations, and actions would each begin to walk down the narrow path of good and evil, revealing the dark side to what was once a perfect story. And, as one man once said, nobody is a villain in their own story. We are all the heroes of our own stories. Rykard was born the son of Radagon and Rennala. His father Radagon was a champion of the Erdtree and the Golden Order, and his mother was Lady Rennala, the head of both the Carian royal family and the Academy of Rea Lucaria. Rykard was not the only child of Radagon and Rennala, for he also had both a brother and sister. His brother was the infamous General Radahn, and his sister, the youngest of the three siblings, was the ever-gracious Lunar Princess Rani.
Well then, shall we?
During his youth, Rykard would have received the greatest education and privileges that were available to him. His noble upbringing would have allowed him to learn both sorceries and incantations among many other things from an early age, and benefit from a prosperous life living under one of the most prominent houses within the lands between. However, it was only a matter of time before certain events would begin to unfold, events that would force a drastic change to Rykard's lavish lifestyle. One day, Queen Marika of the Golden Order relinquished her husband Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, of his grace and titles, commanding him and his followers to leave the lands between and wage war in a far-off land. Upon Godfrey's exile, the title of Elden Lord and husband to Queen Marika became vacant, at which point Radagon, the husband of Rennala, was called upon to be the next Elden Lord. This caused Radagon to abandon Rennala's side, the reasons for which are still unclear even to this day. Rykard's father, Radagon, left Rennala to become Queen Marika's new consort and the second Elden Lord. And as a result of this, not only was Rykard's mother left devastated and heartbroken, but he and his siblings were raised to the status of demigod by their new stepmother, Marika. Whilst Rykard may not have known it at the time, this very act would serve as the first tragic step that would set him on the path towards corruption and depravity. As time progressed, Rykard grew into what was initially perceived to be a righteous and ambitious man. A leader amongst men who was adored and loved by thousands for his ideals and virtues, which in turn inspired many people to both follow and look up to him when the time inevitably came. However, beneath the surface of Rykard's perfect image, his true nature and desires would slowly begin to take hold, prompting a slow but drastic change to who he truly was at heart. At some point during Rykard's lifetime, he ascended to the rank of Justiciar under the Golden Order. This allowed him to administer punishments to those who were deemed heretics and enemies of the Golden Order, which he did so with a cruel ruthlessness, often torturing and condemning those who crossed his path to an unfortunate fate. Alongside this, he also commanded a company of inquisitors, who would hunt down those who were deemed impure, such as the Albinaurics and many other beings within the lands between. Rykard would continue to remain a ruthless justiciar for some time, until one day he decided to leave his home and position behind, opting to go traveling and explore the lands for himself. On his journey, he came across what was known to many as Mount Gelmir, a giant yet dark mountain range, and at its center lay an active volcano, which at the time harbored a dark and unknown secret at its core. Deep within the volcano, Rykard discovered an ancient serpent deity religion, a religion that not too long ago, when he was still a Justiciar, he would have deemed it as heresy towards the Erdtree and the Golden Order. At the center of this ancient religion, Rykard came across a god-devouring serpent by the name of Agley. This monstrous serpent was the deity that was worshipped by the original natives of Mount Gelmir during a time which has long been forgotten. This ancient religion consisted of ritualistic sacrifices that were then offered to the Great Serpent, which some would believe allowed these people to learn new volcanic sorceries and hexes. After this discovery, Rykard elected to make the active volcano his new home, building a mighty castle at the peak of the mountain and committing himself to learning the very same volcanic hexes and sorceries that the ancient religion had learned long ago. Once again, Rykard was beginning to change, committing himself to the very acts that he once deemed as blasphemous, and whether he was aware of it or not, the very morals and ideals that upheld the image of the noble and ambitious Lord Rykard were beginning to shake. For all his love and greatness, Rykard had a dark side that was hidden away, a dark side with twisted desires and wants, desires that he would quite literally hide away under the lock and key of the Volcano Manor.
I saw something slithering in the pitch black of night. Does the Volcano Manor hide some secret?
Underneath the prestigious surface of the Volcano Manor, Rykard would carry out horrific acts of torture and experimentation on those who he deemed impure and unworthy. He began construction on many horrific contraptions and devices, the most infamous of which would come to be known as the Abductor Virgins. These horrific contraptions possessed not only the ability to cause devastation on the battlefield, but also, as its name suggests, abduct people and have them sent back to the Volcano Manor for experimentation and torture. At the time, it would seem that very few people outside of Rykard's home knew of the horrors that were happening there. Yet, the very fact that some people had now seen this side of Rykard, it was clear that he was no longer able to appear as the perfect and righteous man that he once was. As Rykard's true feelings would begin to surface, the Volcano Manor itself, the very manor which he had built, would begin to serve as a physical reflection of Rykard's true nature and intentions. Magnificent and bold on the outside, yet monstrous and full of horror within. However, although it may seem that Rykard was destined for a dark path, not all that was good within him had been lost. At some point, during his travels, Rykard left the lands between to visit a foreign land, and whilst there, he came across a dancer by the name of Tanith, the very same that the player tarnished can stumble across within the Volcano Manor. Upon their meeting, Rykard was instantly captivated by Tanith, and it would seem that the two of them grew to be very close very quickly. As time passed, both Rykard and Tanith grew to love each other dearly, and not long after, Rykard would take Tanith as his consort, and the two of them would reside as the Lord and Lady of the Volcano Manor together. With this very act, it would seem that Rykard's monster within, the very monster who was a torturous and blasphemous individual, was also capable of compassion and love. And yet, this small act of goodness and love would pale in comparison to Rykard's actions, given the events that followed. One day, Rykard's sister Rani devised a terrible plot, a plot that would result in the death of their demigod half-brother, Godwyn the Golden. Rykard's blasphemous incantations led him to assist Rani in a deceitful plot that came to be known to many as the Night of Black Knives. On the night of the plot, Rani rewarded Rykard with a slab of rock engraved with the traces of the Rune of Death. This was a fragment of the Rune of Death which Rani had stolen from Malekith, and should the day ever transpire, it would allow Rykard to challenge the Black Beast of Destined Death himself. As a result of the Night of Black Knives, this set off the chain of events that led to Queen Marika of the Golden Order shattering the Elden Ring. This very act would send the lands between into utter chaos, and each of Marika's demigod children would acquire the great runes within it. Their newfound strength led to a war between the demigods, each seeking to become the new ruler of the lands between. However, for Rykard, his ambitions and desires lay elsewhere. Upon seeing the bloodshed and war that was brought forth by the shattering, Rykard grew tiresome of the gods, the same gods that he once served under the Golden Order, and unlike his demigod siblings, Rykard viewed the Shattering as the greater will, abandoning the people and his family, and forcing them into what he deemed as a petty quarrel and conflict with each other.
The Tarnished were forced to scavenge, squabbling for crumbs, like the Shard-bearers vying for power in the wake of the Shattering. Our Lord, indignant, has refused to scurry about, fighting over what miserly scraps they allow us. If the Erdtree, and indeed the very gods, would debase us so, then we are willing to raise the banner of resistance, even if it means heresy.
It was in this moment that Rykard declared war on the Erdtree and the very gods themselves, launching a blasphemous campaign against them and indulging in every act imaginable that could be used to defy them. Alongside this, many people carried the same belief as Rykard, that the gods had abandoned and turned on them, and so one by one they began to follow his cause. During this time, it would seem that Rykard still possessed the love of the people, and his rebellion against the Erdtree began to grow in number, believing that they were fighting for a just and fair cause. Yet for Rykard, his ideals and ambitions took a selfish turn, and at some point during the war, Rykard began the pursuit for immortality. Perhaps he intended to curse the gods with this act and defy their will, or maybe the war had affected and warped his mind, sparking a fear of eternal death. Regardless of this, he was no longer the virtuous and honorable Lord Rykard that everybody once knew, but instead a cruel and corrupted individual. What followed next was the very act that would forever mark his name in history and also earn him his namesake as Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy, and an enemy of the Erdtree. As Rykard's morals and ambitions changed, he elected to commit what was arguably the most defiant and horrid act that would not only spurn the gods, but also allow Rykard to continue his pursuit for immortality. He decided to engage in a sickening birthing ritual within the manor, and some would believe that another participant of this ritual was a woman by the name of Dager, where it is stated that this woman has indulged in every form of adultery and wicked pleasure imaginable, giving birth to a myriad of grotesque children. Perhaps Rykard chose to have this woman take part in the ritual as a further way to spite the gods and create the most blasphemous being imaginable. However, the exact acts of the ritual are not made clear. Following this, the ritual would see Rykard offer himself up to the great serpent within the volcano, in the hopes of merging together with the creature as one. When Rykard gave himself to the serpent, the birth of the man-serpents followed, the deformed and vile offspring of the horrid birthing ritual. One of these serpents, however, can be encountered by the player Tarnished, and she chooses to introduce herself as Raya of the Volcano Manor and the daughter of Lady Tanith. However, what Raya doesn't know is who her true birth mother is, yet upon following her questline, it is heavily implied to be Dager, the very same woman to take part in Rykard's blasphemous ritual. For Raya, though it would seem that she was born of an impure nature, there are many who would agree that she is a kind soul who is pure of heart, and her existence serves as the physical embodiment of the change to both Rykard's beliefs and ideals, as he was now responsible for the creation of many impure beings, the very same that he used to hunt and persecute all those years ago, back when he was a justiciar of the Golden Order. Rykard was no longer the noble man that was once adored by thousands, having changed now not only mentally, but also physically. His dark and true nature that he had kept locked away for so long had finally crawled its way to the surface, and with a change of the body comes a change of the mind and heart. After this, his defiance towards the Erdtree and the gods instead shifted once more, developing into an obsessive and endless greed for both power and immortality. Power that he believed he could gain by consuming powerful beings and welcoming them into what he referred to as his family.
Join myself and King as remedy. Together we will devour the very god.
Rykard's horrid acts would not only disgrace those that he deemed his enemies, but also himself and all who stood with him. The very same people that once flocked to his cause to defy the gods, upon seeing their leader and idol abandon all morality, they could not help but be overcome with moral disillusionment, falling to despair at the sight of what their beliefs had become. Whatever that thing is, it is no longer Praetor Rykard. Someone must kill him, to spare him and his ambitions from further dishonor. His soldiers would begin to abandon his cause due to the costly battles that they fought during the wars, one of which is said to be the site of the most pitiful battle of the entire war. Not all hope was lost for Rykard, however, as many of his soldiers were still loyal to who he once was, and instead began to carry out desperate attempts to end his dishonor, which they did so by hunting down a weapon known as the Serpent's Spear, where it is stated, when their master's heroic aspirations degenerated into mere greed, his men searched for a weapon with which they might halt their lord. This very act serves as a testament to just how beloved and revered Rykard once was, as now, the very ideals that upheld who he was at heart had changed when he merged with the Great Serpent. Following this change, the only thing that his most loyal followers wanted was to see him laid to rest with what little honor he had left still intact. Lord Rykard, if this putrid field of death is what your blasphemy would bring, then I can no longer abide. No one can. Despite everything that had come to pass, there was still one person that Rykard held close to his heart. Before his change, he offered his consort Tanith, the woman he loved, a tonic of forgetfulness. It would seem that Rykard did not want Tanith to witness his grotesque change, and be forced to watch the man that she loved leave her side forever. This act alone showed that he still possessed some humanity, right up until the end, hoping to protect Tanith from whatever came next. However, to Rykard's surprise, Tanith instead rejected the tonic, and is quoted as saying, "My lord, there could be no greater distress than to forget you." Tanith had sworn herself to Rykard, and following in the wake of his change, she opted to form a cult-like group that went on to be known as the Recusants. The Recusants were known to wage war against the Erdtree and the Roundhold Table, or namely anyone that they deemed as an ally of the Erdtree or gods. The end goal of Tanith was to recruit champions from across the lands, and once they became strong enough, she had them sent to Rykard for what they believed was a meeting with their lord. But instead, the champions were eaten and consumed by Rykard, so that he may become stronger and a part of the Serpent family. It would seem that this act carried on for some time, until one day, the player Tarnished arrived at the manor, and should they choose to follow the Recusant's questline, they too can be tricked into an audience with Lord Rykard. This ruse, however, would not continue as it had always done up to that point, and as we already know, Rykard is defeated and brought down by the Tarnished using the Serpent's Spear, bringing an end to not only his blasphemous campaign against the Erdtree, but also an end to his shame and dishonor. Following the defeat of Rykard, some would argue that he was able to achieve redemption for his past sins and crimes. The corrupting influence of his ambition led him away from what really mattered most. The people who believed in and loved him dearly were all driven away from his cause, as he was no longer the man that they had once adored. In his noble quest to overthrow the Erdtree and consume the gods, he left only a trail of death and treachery in his wake, and yet, despite all of this, he was able to retain the love he had for his consort, Tanith. Perhaps Rykard offered the tonic of forgetfulness to Tanith because he did not wish to inflict any pain towards Tanith when he left, the same way that his father Radagon inflicted pain towards his mother Renala when he abandoned her all those years ago. Whilst his goals were righteous, his methods were not, and on his journey, he became that which he used to hunt and hate, a consumed and corrupt enemy of the Erdtree who had sacrificed his own humanity in the name of ambition. As a result of this, Rykard most likely saw himself as a hero to the people, the hero who was to lead them into the new age. His soldiers would have seen him as a fallen hero, someone who once stood for greatness but was corrupted and changed, never to return. And as for Tanith, she simply saw the man that she loved, no matter his form, and swore herself to be by his side always. Rykard's story does not end there, as after his defeat, Tanith can be seen consuming the remains of Rykard, in the hope that he will one day return and live on through her, just as he had lived through the Great Serpent of Mount Gelmir. With his dying breath, Rykard lays claim to his immortality, calling out to the Tarnished with his final moment and bearing the words,
I servant never die.
My characters who come back from death are worse for wear. In some ways, they're not even the same characters anymore. The body may be moving, but some aspect of the spirit is changed or transformed, and they've lost something. Once there was a time when Rykard had only darkness deep down, but the darkness had surfaced, and yet, perhaps now with his supposed death, deep down there was only a faint trace of good that lingered within him, the will to do what he believed was right, and the love for those that he truly cared for.